How many armored vehicles must burn before Moscow admits defeat? The plains of Zaporizhzhia glow orange beneath a sky thick with smoke, a grim monument to one of the bloodiest mechanized assaults of the year. Engines roar, turrets twist, and the blackened wrecks of Russian armor lie scattered across open fields. October 20th, the day Putin tried once again to break Ukraine's line before winter sealed the ground. By sunrise, the assault had collapsed into chaos. Reports from the Kiev Post and Reuters confirmed the attack began on the outskirts of a small settlement, Malotokmachka. Russia's goal was crush the Ukrainian flank and punch through toward the Zaporizhzhia corridor. The Kremlin poured tanks, infantry fighting vehicles, and armored carriers into the battlefield. At least 26 mechanized units advanced from Pobova and Novopropivka in a pincer movement, their tracks grinding through mud and minefields. But Ukraine was waiting. The 118th Separate Mechanized Brigade, entrenched and battle-hardened, detected the buildup days earlier. Using Western intelligence and drone reconnaissance, they turned the battlefield into a trap. Artillery opened first, then swarms of FPV drones swept low over the treetops, diving straight into Russia's armor. Jane's Defense Weekly noted that many of these drones were modified with anti-tank warheads, each costing less than a Russian soldier's helmet. Precision at a fraction of the price. When the smoke cleared, 22 of the 26 Russian vehicles were gone. Among them, 2 Tiger M transports, 6 armored personnel carriers, and 12 infantry fighting vehicles. Soldiers inside never stood a chance. According to The Guardian, the footage released by Ukraine's military showed drones diving onto Russian tanks as they erupted in fire. Some vehicles rolled on for a few seconds before a second drone finished the job. The situation is under control. Ukraine's command announced no positions lost. But this was more than just another battlefield defeat, it was a message. Russia's mechanized warfare, once feared, had become predictable. Its doctrine was cracking under 21st century warfare. BBC analysts described the assault as an echo of outdated Soviet tactics colliding with modern drone warfare. Wave assaults, once designed to exhaust enemy ammunition, now only exhaust Russian stockpiles and patience. The timing was no coincidence. According to DW, Putin's generals faced growing pressure to produce a symbolic victory before winter, and before President Trump's administration renewed its focus on supporting Kiev's long-range defenses. With global tensions rising, Israel facing Iranian proxies, and US-China friction tightening in the Pacific, Russia's gamble in Zaporizhzhia was meant to reassert Moscow's relevance on the world stage. Instead, it exposed weakness. As the flames spread across Malotokmachka, one question echoed through every command post and newsroom from Kyiv to Washington. If Russia cannot conquer a single village after 3 years of war, what happens when winter comes and the war of machines gives way to the war of endurance? Night falls over the shattered outskirts of Malotokmachka. The sound of engines fades, replaced by the eerie whine of drones slicing through the cold air. What began as a thunderous assault by hundreds of Russian troops has become a field of steel carcasses, silent, scorched, and broken. The offensive was meant to be swift. Instead, it turned into an ambush that stunned even seasoned observers at NATO command. According to the Kiev Post and Defense News, the Russian army deployed its 71st Motorized Rifle Regiment in multiple waves. Each wave, 5 to 8 armored vehicles rolled forward in precise formation. The strategy overwhelmed the defenders, drained their ammunition, and pressed through with follow-up columns. A tactic ripped straight from Soviet-era manuals. But this is not 1985. Ukraine's 118th Brigade anticipated the move. Before dawn, its scouts picked up Russian heat signatures through thermal drones. Within minutes, artillery coordinates were locked. The first shells rained down as Russian armor crossed the tree line. FPV drones, sleek buzzing, guided by operators miles away, chased tanks like vultures over open terrain. Jane's Defense Weekly described the attack as a rolling death trap, a combination of mines, drones, and crossfire that decimated the assault before it reached Ukrainian trenches. The Russian Tigers, once the pride of Moscow's ground mobility, didn't last long. One was caught on footage barbed wire cope cage strapped across its roof, desperate to deflect incoming drones. It failed. The second drone struck from the side, piercing the cage and detonating inside. Flames engulfed the crew compartment, leaving only twisted metal. This image, spread by Al Jazeera and Reuters, became the defining frame of the failed Zaporizhzhia offensive, a symbol of outdated armor crushed by modern precision. Ukraine's counterfire was relentless. Soviet-era T-72 tanks refurbished with Western optics rumbled into the fight, firing from concealed positions. DW reported that these tanks, once destined for museums, are now key players in Ukraine's hybrid defense, blending old steel with new technology. As Russian infantry scattered drones hovered above tracking movements for follow-up artillery strikes. Within hours, the fields outside Malotokmachka resembled a scrapyard of lost ambition. But the tactical story tells only part of the truth. Strategically, this assault revealed something deeper: Moscow's desperation. Analysts from The Guardian wrote that Russia is reverting to mechanized mass assaults not out of confidence but necessity. Its elite troops are exhausted, its precision missiles dwindling, and its battlefield innovation lagging behind Ukraine's agile NATO-assisted command systems. The shockwaves extend far beyond Ukraine. In the Middle East, Israel and Iran monitor the battlefield closely, learning from the drone tactics shaping modern warfare. In Asia, the Pentagon warns that China's military observers are studying Zaporizhzhia for lessons on combined arms vulnerabilities. Warfare is evolving in real time, and the West knows that what happens over Ukraine's farmlands today may define tomorrow's conflicts. Still amid the smoke and numbers, there are human stories. Russian soldiers trapped in burning vehicles. Ukrainian operators guiding FPV drones through static-filled screens, watching explosions bloom miles away. The faces remain unseen, but the toll is unmistakable. So as the fires dim over Malotokmachka, a chilling question lingers. How long can Russia sustain this pattern, sacrificing men and metal for symbolic ground that never holds? At sunrise, the battlefield looked like a scrapyard of shattered ambition. Russian tanks and infantry vehicles, once symbols of strength, now lay gutted along the muddy fields. Smoke spiraled into the air, carrying the stench of oil and burnt steel, a graveyard of Putin's mechanized pride. The assault that Moscow described as decisive had instead become a lesson in humiliation. Footage released by Ukraine's 118th Separate Mechanized Brigade turned the world's eyes toward Zaporizhzhia. Drone-mounted cameras captured Russian vehicles bursting into flames one after another. In one clip verified by Reuters, an FPV drone pursued a retreating armored carrier as another drone recorded from above a double strike caught in real time. "We are working in a coordinated and decisive manner," the brigade's caption read. Every word dripped with quiet confidence. The cope cage's crude metal contraptions welded atop Russian tanks to deflect drone strikes proved useless. As The Guardian observed, they symbolized not innovation, but panic. Ukraine's drones adapted faster than Russia could respond, diving at weak points, striking from unpredictable angles. The first drone might miss, the second never did. Euromaidan Press reported that of the 26 armored vehicles Russia deployed in the Malotokmachka assault, 22 were destroyed or abandoned, 12 infantry fighting vehicles, 6 armored personnel carriers, and 2 Tiger M transports gone. If each carried a full squad, the human toll could easily exceed 100 casualties in a single failed push. BBC analysts called it a massacre of machines and men, marking one of Russia's worst localized defeats since the early months of 2025. The pattern is familiar. Putin's commanders throw steel at problems that require strategy. Each loss erodes morale, but Moscow's narrative machine spins on. Kremlin media declared the assault a probing operation, claiming partial success. Yet satellite images from DW told the opposite story: burned wreckage, cratered roads, and no territorial gain. Meanwhile, Ukraine's use of drones is evolving into something unprecedented. Jane's Defense Weekly noted that small Ukrainian teams now operate FPV drones with precision that rivals guided missiles, turning cheap civilian hardware into lethal weapons. Western observers have dubbed it the democratization of destruction. No tank, no matter how heavily armored, is safe. Strategically, the failure at Malotokmachka exposes the fragility of Russia's entire southern front. The Zaporizhzhia region, a critical corridor connecting occupied Crimea to the Russian mainland, is slipping out of reach. According to Defense News, NATO surveillance aircraft detected unusual Russian troop redeployments following the assault, evidence that Moscow is now reinforcing defensive lines instead of advancing, a silent admission that its offensive momentum is gone. And as the West watches comparisons multiply, in Israel's ongoing shadow conflict with Iran, drone warfare now mirrors Ukraine's model speed, precision, low-cost, high terror. In the South China Sea, the US Navy tracks China's expanding drone fleet with renewed urgency. The battlefields may differ, but the lesson is the same. The age of mechanized supremacy is ending. Yet amid these global parallels, the human cost remains brutal. Ukrainian rescuers comb through charred remains of Russian armor, pulling bodies for identification. Soldiers on both sides record last messages home. For them, this is no abstract drone revolution. It is fire, fear, and survival. So the question grows sharper with every lost vehicle and every new grave. Can brute force still win wars in an era when the smallest drone can cripple an empire's pride? 2 days later, the sound of drones returned, but this time, not to the battlefield. Zaporizhzhia city awoke to the whine of engines above civilian homes. On October 22nd, according to Ukrinform and BBC News, Russia unleashed a wave of long-range drone attacks targeting residential districts. Windows shattered. Fires spread through apartment blocks. Among the wounded were children, one only 7 months old, the youngest victims of a war they never chose. This was not strategy, it was punishment. The Kremlin's frustration over the failed assault at Malatokmatka turned into terror from the skies. 15 civilians injured in a single night. Shrapnel tore through home streets burned with carbon monoxide fumes. Reuters confirmed that Russia's Shahed-type drones, Iranian-designed and locally modified, were responsible. Moscow's military calls it psychological warfare. The world calls it desperation. Zaporizhzhia has become one of the most targeted regions of the entire war. Action on Armed Violence, an independent monitoring group cited by The Guardian, reports over 10,000 incidents impacting civilians since the invasion began, resulting in more than 42,000 casualties. Nearly a third of those deaths come from air-launched weapons drones, glide bombs, and missiles. Ukraine's cities have become laboratories for fear. Yet this new wave of violence may hide a deeper motive. Analysts at DW suggest that Russia's drone strikes aim not just to destroy, but to paralyze Ukraine's logistics, forcing Kyiv to divert air defenses from the front lines to protect its urban centers. It's a cruel calculation: when soldiers are safe, civilians die. When civilians are safe, soldiers are exposed. Putin's generals exploit that trade-off. Still, the strike on October 22nd revealed more than cruelty, it revealed weakness. The timing followed back-to-back military failures, and Western intelligence sources told Defense News that Russia's command structure is losing coherence. Units redeployed from Sumy to Zaporizhzhia have suffered heavy losses, and communication lines between Moscow and field commanders are fracturing. What the Kremlin calls repositioning looks more like retreat. Globally, the pattern feels chillingly familiar. In Gaza and southern Lebanon, Israel faces a similar dilemma: drone strikes against densely populated areas that blur the line between defense and deterrence. In the Persian Gulf, Iranian proxy militias use the same playbook, launching drone attacks on commercial shipping to project power through chaos. Even across the Pacific, the United States and China monitor these developments, closely aware that the next major war may not begin with tanks, but with a swarm of cheap, fast, and unmanned killers. President Trump's administration has increased pressure on European allies to accelerate drone defense systems, citing Zaporizhzhia as proof that mass warfare is no longer about numbers, but about adaptation. NATO's task forces now test AI-assisted counter-drone nets and laser systems across Poland and Romania. The technology race is accelerating not toward peace, but toward automated precision. For the people of Zaporizhzhia, though, the conversation is simpler. It's about survival. Families huddle in basements as generators hum through the night. Volunteers distribute food under streetlights flickering from nearby blasts. Parents tell children the sounds outside are thunder. And as another Russian drone dives into the city's skyline, the question that echoes across Ukraine's broken rooftops and into the conscience of the world is hauntingly simple. If the war for Zaporizhzhia is now fought by machines who still remembers the humans caught beneath them, summer was supposed to deliver Putin's triumph. Instead, it exposed his empire's fracture. The offensive that began in June and stretched through August ended in humiliation, thousands of casualties, hundreds of destroyed vehicles, and barely 0.3% of Ukrainian territory gained. According to the Atlantic Council and Reuters, this strategic disaster has shattered the illusion of an unstoppable Russian advance. In early September, General Oleksandr Syrsky reported that Russia had redeployed troops from the Sumy region to Zaporizhzhia after the northern front collapsed. The goal seized leverage before winter and forced Kyiv to negotiate. Yet the results have been catastrophic. As DW analysts put it, the Kremlin traded bodies for headlines and got neither. The numbers tell the story. By the end of summer 2025, Moscow's forces had suffered over 210,000 casualties. Entire battalions were decimated during what The Guardian called the offensive that never moved. Pokrovsk, a key eastern stronghold Putin vowed to capture, remains firmly under Ukrainian control. No major breakthroughs, no captured cities, only ruins, exhaustion, and retreat. The failure forced Moscow to revert to familiar delusions. State media boasted of strategic regrouping, while commanders on the ground buried soldiers by the hundreds. As Jane's Defense Weekly observed, Russian operations now consist of recycled strategies under new labels. Mechanized waves once symbolized power, now they reveal panic. The Malotokmechka assault was not a tactical choice. It was a desperate attempt to reclaim lost narrative control. But the deeper crisis lies not on the front lines, but in Moscow itself. Reports from the Moscow Times describe a widening rift between Putin's inner circle and his generals. Intelligence briefings have been distorted, victories fabricated, losses minimized. When Putin declared in early October that Ukrainian forces were retreating across the entire line of contact, analysts at The Guardian called it a speech divorced from reality. His generals nodded and sent more men to die. This same pattern echoes through history. The British learned it at Dunkirk, the Americans in Vietnam, the Soviets in Afghanistan. Now Russia learns it again in Ukraine. Truth is the first casualty of defeat. Meanwhile, NATO's focus has shifted. President Trump's Defense Council now weighs the strategic implications of Russia's failure. A weakened Kremlin may not mean stability. Desperate powers make reckless choices. U.S. intelligence, according to Reuters, fears that Moscow could escalate through long-range missile terror or cyber warfare conflict through desperation. In the wider geopolitical chessboard, parallels abound. Iran, cornered by sanctions and regional isolation, turns to proxy wars in Syria and Lebanon. China, facing economic stagnation, intensifies pressure in the Taiwan Strait. Each, like Russia, seeks distraction through aggression. Each measures the West's resolve. For Ukraine, the message is both empowering and sobering. Victory is possible, but only through endurance. The Guardian's analysis warns that Russia's defeat will not come from a single battle, but from the slow collapse of its ability to sustain them. Every failed offensive erodes Moscow's capacity. Every burned vehicle chips away at the myth of inevitability. Yet even in defeat, Russia's capacity for destruction remains formidable. Drones, missiles, propaganda all continue to strike with deadly persistence. The Kremlin no longer fights for victory, it fights to deny Ukraine peace. So as the war's rhythm shifts from attack to attrition, one question looms over the shattered plains of Zaporizhzhia and the marble halls of the Kremlin alike. When a superpower loses its sense of truth, how long before it loses the war itself? The coming winter will test not just Ukraine's defenses, but the endurance of nations. The war has entered its frozen phase, a clash of attrition, where cold, hunger, and exhaustion rival bullets as weapons. Both armies know that once the ground hardens, armored maneuvers will grind to a crawl. Yet beneath the frost, strategies are already shifting. According to Reuters, and DW, Russia is massing forces once again along the Zaporizhzhia and Donetsk fronts. The Kremlin calls it preparation for a final assault on Donbass. Western intelligence calls it delusion. Despite catastrophic losses, Putin's command still believes victory lies in sheer numbers, that wave after wave of men and machines can wear down Ukraine's will. But Ukraine has learned to fight smarter, not harder. Drone warfare, Western targeting data, and rapid response artillery have turned small brigades into immovable fortresses. NATO's analysts say the real battle is no longer for territory, but for momentum. Ukraine's defensive operations now aim to drain Russian resources faster than Moscow can replenish them. Every destroyed tank is a symbol of efficiency, of survival, of defiance. As The Guardian noted, Zaporizhzhia has become a proving ground where 20th century warfare meets 21st century technology, and only one side is adapting fast enough to survive. Still, the stakes stretch beyond Ukraine's borders. Washington sees in Zaporizhzhia a reflection of global fault lines. President Trump's administration continues to balance deterrence and diplomacy, reaffirming NATO's unity while negotiating cautious de-escalation channels with Beijing and Tehran. America's prestige hangs on that balance to defend freedom abroad without igniting a world on fire. The echoes reach the Middle East. Israel's ongoing confrontation with Iran has turned the desert skies into drone-laden arenas, while Chinese cyber units probe US systems with increasing boldness. In this new world, drones, sanctions, and propaganda are as decisive as missiles. The lessons of Zaporizhzhia are universal: wars are no longer won by the biggest army, but by the fastest mind. For Ukraine, survival itself is victory. Each passing month proves that morale and adaptability can outweigh manpower. For Russia, however, the mirror of defeat is unforgiving, the illusion of invincibility shattered, the myth of quick conquest buried beneath blackened steel. The Kremlin's machinery of fear, once global, now trembles under its own weight. Yet even as analysts and diplomats calculate strategies, the human toll remains the heart of the story. Families in Zaporizhzhia light candles in dark basements. Soldiers on frozen front lines share cigarettes in silence, staring at drones glowing like cold stars in the night sky. The war has become a machine, but the people, weary, unbroken, remain its soul. And as another Russian convoy creeps toward the front, the question hangs heavy in the frozen air. Will the next great power to rise from this war be the one that learns to fight, or the one that learns to stop? The failed assault on Zaporizhzhia in October 2025 marks a decisive shift in modern warfare. Russia's mechanized onslaught on Mala-Tokmachka meant to crush Ukraine's defenses ended in catastrophic losses. 22 of 26 armored vehicles destroyed, hundreds of soldiers dead, and Ukraine's resilience on full display. The attack revealed a military still trapped in Soviet tactics, facing an opponent mastering drone warfare and rapid adaptability. In the aftermath, Russia turned its fury on civilians, launching drone strikes across Zaporizhzhia that injured children and families, exposing a leadership descending into desperation. Analysts from Reuters, BBC, and The Guardian agree Moscow's command has fractured its objectives unclear. Yet the conflict extends beyond Ukraine. From the Persian Gulf to the South China Sea, powers study this war for lessons in technology, attrition, and resolve. Under President Trump, the US navigates an era where drones define deterrence, and power is measured not by territory, but by endurance. Zaporizhzhia stands as both battlefield and mirror, showing the world what happens when pride meets precision, and when truth itself becomes a casualty of war.